I'm Nick Westergaard, and this is the 500th episode of On Brand. My guest this week is Tom Webster.
Well, first of all, I think you should be thinking about calling it the On Brand 500, which sounds like a regional NASCAR. I think you need to be thinking about, is your show retaining the same audience year after year, or is it churning new audience year after year? And it probably is doing the latter, as most things that exist over time do. And I think what you have to be thinking about is, where are they today? Have they changed? Are they new people, or are they the same people you've had who have evolved? And, how does your show fit into their lives?
Tom Webster is a partner at Sounds Profitable, the leading voice of significance for the digital audio industry, devoted to growing the podcast sector through audio insights, education, and connections. As a 25-year audio research veteran, he is a trusted advisor to the biggest companies in audio and has dedicated his career to the advancement of podcasting for networks and individuals alike. Tom has been a co-author and driver behind some of audio's most influential studies, including the Infinite Dial series, Share of Ear, and the Podcast Landscape. Additionally, he has led hundreds of audience research projects on 6 continents for some of the most listened to podcasts and syndicated radio shows in the world, from Howard Stern to All Things Considered. He's done a card trick for Paula Abdul, shared a martini with Tom Jones, and sold vinyl to Christopher Walken. With Tom's partnership at its helm, Sounds Profitable is dedicated to set the course for the future of the audio industry. On Brand looks at 500 episodes, and we discuss the state of podcasting today with Tom Webster. But first,
as a person with a very deep voice, I'm hired all the time for advertising campaigns. But a deep voice doesn't sell B2B, and advertising on the wrong platform doesn't sell B2B either. That's why if you're a B2B marketer, you should use LinkedIn ads. LinkedIn has the targeting capabilities to help you reach the world's largest professional audience. That's right, over 70 million decision makers all in one place. All the big wigs, then medium wigs, also small wigs who are on the path to becoming big wigs. Okay, that's enough about wigs. LinkedIn ads allows you to focus on getting your B2B message to the right people. So, does that mean you should use ads on LinkedIn instead of hiring me, the man with the deepest voice in the world? Yes, it does. Get started today and see why LinkedIn is the place to be to be. We'll even give you a $100 credit on your next campaign. Go to linkedin.com/MPN to claim your credit. That's linkedin.com/MPN. Terms and conditions apply.
You may know you're listening to this show along the Marketing Podcast Network, but did you know there are other great shows on MPN to help your business? Steve Turney hosts a great podcast geared toward mental health marketers called The Boost. Steve, tell listeners what you cover on the show.
The Boost is our podcast, and the tagline is conversations with people promoting mental health. And that's what it is. So it's marketers, company executives, therapists, and mental health advocates talking about what they're doing to move this industry and this important thing called mental health forward.
Amazing. And where can people subscribe?
I'm big on LinkedIn, so you can find us there, just /Steve Turney, or you can find the show at marketingpodcasts.net, or search for The Boost wherever you get your podcasts.
You heard him. Go subscribe.
Tom Webster, welcome to On Brand.
Oh, thank you, Nick. And I understand, is this a special episode?
This is a very special episode. Cue the moving music that we won't have. This is a very special episode of Blossom. So I want to talk about all things audio and all things related to being the voice of significance. But one can't have a bio that references a card trick for Paula Abdul, a martini with Tom Jones, and selling vinyl to Christopher Walken. I would say, keeping with the celebratory theme of the very special episode, I have to hear at least one of those stories. Which one is your favorite to tell?
My favorite was, so there's a radio station that I used to consult here in Boston where I live called Kiss 108. And it's the big, top 40 chart station in Boston and has been for many, many decades. And every year they do this huge benefit concert called the Kiss concert. And I did all of the music and audience research for KISS and the other stations in that chain for a long time. And KISS concert was always like, one of my favorite times of the year, but like the least favorite time to listen to the station, because the station would make all kinds of bad deals. Like, if you'll play at KISS concert, we'll play your song. And and one year of KISS concert, they really wanted Tom Jones, and so KISS was playing some. I think they were playing his cover of Prince's Kiss. And he came to a KISS concert and he sang. And I went to an after party at a nightclub that's no longer around. It's a nightclub that was owned by Aerosmith called Mamakin. And we did sort of an after party there. And I was there with my boss, an extremely gregarious and connected human, the late Frank Cody. And Tom Jones was over at the bar getting a martini. And I said something to Frank about how I would love to meet Tom. And Frank goes, "I'll introduce you." And so he brings me over to the bar and he says, Tom, I really want you to meet someone. Tom Jones, this is Tom Webster. And I got a martini and we sat and Frank was like, "You're both Welsh," and all this. And afterwards I asked Frank, I was like, "So how did you first meet Tom?" And he said, "Oh, I've never met Tom."
Wow.
And that's more a story about Frank than Tom Jones. But yeah, Tom, I want you to meet someone.
I love it. You were his way into to meeting Tom Jones in that exchange. It does remind me, in addition to KISS, another one of my favorite Tom Jones songs is a little known favorite called "The Young New Mexican Puppeteer." So
Wow. That is a
definitely
deep cut, Nick Westergaard. That is a deep cut.
It's a deep cut, and it is a story song. So, it's about this puppeteer who makes puppets of people like Martin Luther King and Abraham Lincoln to change the world. It is the strangest piece of music, and I am here for it, especially here on this celebratory episode. So getting right into that. So I'm 500 episodes into this thing. What Tom should I be thinking about? That's really the driving force behind you as the guest here is podcasting has been around for a long damn time, and it doesn't appear to be going anywhere. What should a 500 episode show be thinking about?
Well, first of all, I think you should be thinking about calling it the On Brand 500, which is sounds like a regional NASCAR competition of sorts. I think you need to be thinking about is your show retaining the same audience year after year, or is it churning new audience year after year? And it probably is doing the latter, as most things that exist over time do. And I think what you have to be thinking about is where are they today? Have they changed? Are they new people, or are they the same people you've had who have evolved? And how does your show fit into their lives? And that's always, I think, one of the most important questions that anybody who is thinking about starting a podcast should really ask themselves is, where does this show fit into their life? Because they could choose anything, right? People listening to this right now could, you're competing against going to fix a snack, frankly, right? Your competition is not other podcasts about marketing and branding. It's life, and people could be doing any number of things. So what is the context that people consume your show in? Where do they like to listen to it? How does it slot into their lives? And what else slots into their lives? And I think the more you have a grasp of those things, the more connected you can be with your audience, the more you stay in touch with them, and the more it feels like you're having a one-to-one conversation with them.
That is, again, and I love how it was both advice useful to me where I'm at, but also a good question, because I think it's funny because for as long as podcasting has been around, I feel like it still gets kind of shiny new thing cred out there in the world of, ooh, I wanna make sure we're doing one of those, and people run the risk of not exactly knowing why they want to do one, And those questions that you just kind of listed out are critical to anyone kind of looking at that blank page and thinking about it. If someone was listening and thinking, "Oh, geez, those are the questions to ask," how do I go about answering those? What do you recommend?
Well, I'm a big proponent of doing some kind of listener research, and that doesn't necessarily mean anything particularly formal. But I do think that there are some really good questions you can ask, even if you're only talking to 5 or 6 people, right? If you can find a way to connect with some listeners, I think there's some really good questions you can ask that will improve your show, right? Without having to do a survey of thousands. And the way I like to think about this is that people have your show has a role in their lives of some kind, and the more you can figure out what that role is, I think the more you can work to improve your show. And some of the questions that I like to ask, if you find people on social media or happen to meet a listener in the wild, the foremost question that you want to know the answer to is why do you listen to my show? And it's not the why of your show, because for a lot of people the why of their show is not all that interesting to other humans, right? It might be, I want to make money and I don't care about that. But why do you listen to my show over somebody else's? And if my show were to go away, what would you miss about it? And questions like that will elicit responses, right? If you ask someone, if my show went away, how would you feel, and what would you miss the most? You're likely to get a specific response. Whereas if you ask somebody, what do you think of my show? You're likely to get, I like it. It's interesting. It's funny. Like, you're not going to get a lot of useful information out of a vague question like that. So, and I published an article at soundsprofitable.com several months ago called "What We Talk About When We Talk About Podcasts," and it was 5.5 really good questions to ask people, even if you can only talk to 4 or 5 people about your show, that will elicit specific and useful response. So I'd recommend that.
Well, that is a great recommendation. And as a reminder, I'll link up to that in our show notes at onbrandpodcast.com. But I love even that conversational point, because I know for me as a podcaster, it's interesting because I started out both blogging, writing articles, and podcasting. And now the podcasting I do has really eclipsed that for some different reasons. And I used to run into people at events and elsewhere who would say, "Oh, I've read your blog, and now it is what you've just said is I listen to your podcast." But not just letting that go. I think it's an important reminder that that's a potential research input, and it makes me kick myself for we had an alumni visiting from the University of Iowa, Mark Gamis, who I'm giving a shout out to, who wanted to meet with me, and it wasn't because I taught an interesting class or was doing work that he wanted to know more about, but he listened to my podcast, and I am kicking myself for not asking where does this fit into your life, and that space that it's sitting there. You remember he said he's a big smartless listener, and it's like, wow, how am I ending up in this kind of pre-programmed audio that a listener is putting together with those guys. So, such an interesting kind of point of view from today's audio consumer as well. What do you see as being kind of some of the critical defining points of today's audio consumer?
Well, there's no such thing as today's audio consumer. First of all, I think there are multiple contexts and environments that people consume audio. When podcasting first started, it was a very technocratic enterprise, right? You had people that were interested in the technology. They were interested in podcasts for the sake of podcasting. They were interested in podcasting. And, we've moved fairly beyond those years in just in a couple of short decades here, where you now have a lot more people who are interested in a show, and where they get that show isn't important to them. Whether or not they get it from a podcast app, or they get it on YouTube, or they get a clip of it in social media somewhere, there's still, I think there's the listener definition of what a podcast is, and then there's the sort of technical definition of what a podcast is. And I don't think they've ever been further apart, frankly. But I think, you do have some people that are lean forward listeners, and you do have people that are lean back listeners. And you'll have people that take their show with them as a companion to other things that they do in their lives. And then you'll have people that will, sit in front of a screen and concentrate and consume your show very actively. So I think, trying to be where your listeners are as much as possible, trying to make sure that your Coke can is in as many machines as possible, even if those are Pepsi and RC Cola machines, pour one out for RC Cola. It is really the key to success here, is being on the screen in front of them, whatever that screen happens to be.
On Brand will be right back after this.
Did you know the world's largest business show is expanding to Miami March 6th and 7th at the Miami Beach Convention Center? The Business Show is helping small businesses start, grow, and develop. Learn all the tips, tricks, and advice you need. It's a free pass to a wealth of information you can't find anywhere else. And yes, you heard that right, free tickets. Just go to bit.ly/MPNB2B. That's bit.ly/B2B. Your free ticket also gets you into Going Global Live, Working From Home Live, Retrain Expo, the Sustainability Show, and the Future Working Show. Each helps to tackle the growing demands of an evolving business world. Don't miss out. Register now at bit.ly/MPNB2B. The Business Show, Miami, March 6th and 7th. See you there. You may know you're listening to this show along the Marketing Podcast Network, but did you know there are other great shows on MPN to help your business? Gordon Glenister hosts an outstanding podcast called the Influence Global Podcast. Gordon, tell these fine folks what they're going to get when they listen.
We interview some amazing people from all around the world, whether they be influencers, content creators, brands, influencer platforms, anybody involved in the influencer industry. There's some fantastic guests that make a fine listen for you. You can find them on marketingpodcasts.net, or you can also find them on my own website, which is www.gordonglenister.com.
Or, of course, wherever you get your podcasts.
Now, back to the show. So you were talking about the whatever screen it is that people are on. Are there other aspects of great answer with there's no podcast, sole podcast or audio consumer. But as we talk about the different screens, is there a podcast ecosystem of beyond the show itself? What else makes up the brand experience of what we call a podcast?
Yeah. So to me, the podcast is an offshoot, is an element of the show. The show is the atomic unit to me. And they're different, right? The podcast might be the RSS delivered audio enclosure that gets sent to Apple Podcasts or something else, right? The show can also be packaged up for Spotify. The show can also be you can video yourself talking into your microphone and put that on YouTube. But then there's also how do you engage with an audience? And I think it's that engagement part that, separates a podcast from a broadcast, right? If you're just doing a time shifted broadcast, I don't think you're taking full advantage of the medium, and some of that is how you conduct the show. Do you sound like you're talking to everyone, or are you talking to one specific person? And it's the latter that makes a great show, I think. But also, are there other avenues for your audience to engage with you? And, in some cases, I think that's why a lot of podcasters have chosen to put their show on YouTube, because you have comment section. Social media is certainly important for a lot of podcasters to, even if that's, whether that's a Facebook page or, Instagram or anything else, But I do think it's important for your audience to have a way to reach you and to have a way to connect with you, to close the loop there. Because a podcast is different than listening to a radio station. A podcast, for the most part, is happening between earbuds. It's happening in your mind. There is necessarily, almost being forced upon you, a closer relationship between you and the host. And I think people want to feel like that's authentic in some way. So I think the podcast is just one offshoot of the show, but the show, I think, has to have a lot of different tentacles to really take root.
That's a really good point. And I feel like in general, as podcasting came up alongside social media, it used to be kind of the general, hey, find us on wherever. But it seems like I'm in the shows that are a part of my life, and I will out myself beyond the branding and marketing shows I listen to. I'm a big fan of Rob Lowe's Literally, and he has a call-in number at the end of that. And the podcaster in me, I always switch into that mode at that point in the show, because I'm wondering, is there data findings on those really direct, hey, call this number, leave a message here, that is sparking engagement?
There's loads of that data in radio, and there's not a lot of that data in podcasting. There's very little of it, and yet, from years of research in the radio industry, I know it's enormously successful. There's a podcast that I listen to called The Steam Room, which is Ernie Johnson and Charles Barkley. And, Charles Barkley is famously not on social media at all. But the show, the last segment of the show, Charles leaves his answering machine number. And people call in and they leave a message, and it's full of inside jokes and callbacks. And, they call their audience the loyal steamers. And you hear other people's voices on the show, and that really just magnifies connection with the show, and it turns it from being just another semi-sports current events podcast to being, I'm part of a family. I'm part of a unit here, and and Charles has my back, and he always celebrates the callers. He never ridicules them. To me, that's just magic. And I know and have the research that works incredibly well on radio, and radio has just gotten so far from that.
That's, such a, and it's the same kind of effect on the, and what you said in there of it gets another voice, a listener voice on the show. And I think something like that, beyond just, hey, hit us up on social media, but if someone's if they're calling, if they're recording their voice, and that's a voice with a question that you can use on the show to answer that, I think that, has real impact and is definitely something to look at. You talk about being an audio research veteran, and with that last answer, it did make me wonder, and I realize that mileage may vary, but do you find that, like with that last answer of knowing something about radio data on that, do you find that it is somewhat applicable to the podcasting space? Are there points of divergence?
Well, I think the podcast space is such new territory for the audience in a lot of ways, right? That the rules there aren't really rules yet, and I think they're still sort of being made up as they go along, because people are discovering podcasts every day, and if their relationship with spoken word audio has been the radio, then what they're used to today, sadly, is a very limited palette. Right. Most of what passes for spoken word audio on commercial radio, and I'll leave public out of this, is largely syndicated political shows or financial shows. And that's largely appealing to a very narrow demographic, the demographic that's kind of left for talk radio, which is largely older, largely male. And that's really, sadly, because radio has seeded a lot of younger listeners to other media and other formats. But if that's your limited palette, and then you discover a podcast about that weird thing you do that you love, right? Like, oh my God, there's a fly tying podcast. I love tying flies. I don't know what a fly tying podcast would be other than very, very tiny. but I think there's a delight in discovering that, right? And then at that point, yeah, a whole world sort of opens up to you. And I'm not sure all of the rules of radio apply, but I do think that there are some constants in building a great show. And I think just apropos of what Charles Barkley does with the Answering Machine and things like that, I think the difference between a radio show and a podcast is kind of which direction the chairs are facing. And radio is very much there's a big chair and the audience is facing that chair. And I think with a podcast, you have the opportunity to move all those chairs around in a circle. And most of that can happen on the show, but not all of it can happen in the audio itself. So I think finding ways to make people feel a part of that circle is what creates loyalty, what gives them the license and encourages them to give you feedback. And that creates a virtuous loop.
That's such a great point, and it makes me. You mentioned public radio, and it's like I almost feel like we're at a weird point in these terms where they're almost because you've got podcasts like I think of the Moth Radio Hour that originates and is heard on public radio. And has a podcast that is of the same name, referring to itself as a radio hour, radio show. And you've got National Public Radio that is also a producer of amazing digital audio content. So it's almost like some of these labels are really kind of fuzzy and overlapping too. I like the chair example, but what about those enormous audio brands that are doing big things that are kind of overlapping some of these traditional categories?
Well, first of all, as I will point out to you, as they've been a long time client, partner, and friend, it's NPR, not National Public Radio.
Good. My bad.
Yeah. Well, the thing about an entity like NPR, and many dear friends at NPR, is that they have maintained the muscle memory of creating quality narrative audio content for decades. And I think there was a time in the radio industry where, as the radio industry first got involved with podcasting, I think a lot of commercial broadcasters were like, let us help you, little podcasters. Let us help you tend to your garden and teach you the basics. And the podcasters are like, nah, we're good. Because a lot of commercial radio broadcasters, think about this. Most commercial radio stations in the United States, overwhelming majority, fall into one of two categories. They're playing music or they are playing syndicated programming straight off the satellite. Right. So the average radio station, the average commercial radio station in America, it's not necessarily a given that they have any kind of narrative audio storytelling chops whatsoever. Why would they? They don't do it. So they're out of practice with it, right? And that's something that I think in public media has always been part of the core of public media is oral storytelling, and that's why so many great podcasts emanate from public media, and why so many ex-public media pros have filtered their way into commercial podcast endeavors. I think radio is a little bit different now. And, some of the biggest podcast companies in America are, in fact, radio companies. iHeart's a big podcast company, Cumulus / Westwood, Odyssey. And these are some of the biggest podcasters in America. And they're also some of the biggest broadcasters. And they've done it with a mix of, yes, some repurposed shows. Certainly, iHeart's The Breakfast Club, which is a radio show, is one of the biggest podcasts in America. It's a top 20 show. So there's that aspect of it. But the other side of the coin, iHeart also owns How Stuff Works. And that's absolutely a bespoke made for podcasting podcast. So it's a mix. There's no one size fits all, I think. But there are lessons that both sides can learn from each other. I'll just put it that way.
I love that. And that seems like a great point to wrap things up as well. Tom, every conversation with you makes me smile, but I am excited to hear a brand that has made you smile recently.
I'm going to shout out to a local brand here. I'm in Boston, and there's a local brand here called Ministry of Supply that is, they're certainly nationwide, but they emanated from MIT with some designers looking at tech fabrics for, from NASA and things like that, and deciding, I bet I can make a good polo shirt out of this. And they have done a really good job making clothing. I wear a lot of it myself. It never wrinkles. It looks great. And they have recently, as if they didn't already have me to the tune of many thousands of dollars a year, they've been sending things like capsules for frequent travelers and are you a speaker getting on stage? Here's an outfit that will never wrinkle and always. And I'm like, what? Stop it. So they make me smile. They're never intrusive about it. It doesn't take much buying from them for you to get the CEO's personal email and things like that. They're extremely in touch with their customers, and I happen to love their clothes. So shout out to the locals here, Ministry of Supply.
Hey, you had me at clothing. I wear a lot of it. So definitely good advice. You've given a lot of good advice, but wearing clothing is really key. Ministry of Supply has been stalking me online. So with your description there of, because that's exactly what I was thinking of. It feels like those would be good speaking clothes. So I will,
I'll be wearing them on stage next week. So they absolutely will be good speaking clothes.
Tom, where can folks go to learn more about who you are and what you do?
Everything that I do now is funneled through Sounds Profitable, soundsprofitable.com. We have a weekly newsletter, which I typically write, which is generally a thought piece about the business. And then we also have a daily newsletter called The Download, which is sort of the top 3 to 5 stories that affect the business of podcasting. So they're sort of less about tech and content and more sort of about the monetization side. And we have podcast versions of both of those. And you can find us on LinkedIn. It's probably where we're most active.
Awesome. Well, again, I'll link up to all of that in our show notes, which folks can find at onbrandpodcast.com. Tom Webster, thanks for being with us on the 500th episode of On Brand.
I looked at the proper gift for a 500th anniversary, and what happens is they run out somewhere in the early hundreds, and so they just restart over again. So the gift that I got you for episode 500 it's a clock.
Oh, awesome!
It's a clock.
I appreciate that. Well, thank you, sir.
Thank you. My pleasure.
On Brand is part of the Marketing Podcast Network. If you like what you're hearing, if we've made you smile, you can always listen free on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or whatever your favorite platform may be. And please take a moment and rate and review the podcast to help others find the show. Until next week, I'm Nick Westergaard, and I'll see you on the internet.
You may know you're listening to this show along the Marketing Podcast Network, but did you know there are other great shows on MPN to help your business? Gordon Glenister hosts an outstanding podcast called the Influence Global Podcast. Gordon, tell these fine folks what they're going to get when they listen.
We interview some amazing people from all around the world, whether they be influencers, content creators, brands, influencer platforms, anybody involved in the influencer industry. There's some fantastic guests that make a fine listen for you. You can find them on marketingpodcasts.net, or you can also find them on my own website, which is www.gordonglenister.com.
Or, of course, wherever you get your podcasts. This podcast is heard along the Marketing Podcast Network. For more great marketing podcasts, visit marketingpodcasts.net.